Of all the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, few are more beloved than Captain America. The character of Steve Rogers is interesting, genuine, and portrayed excellently by Chris Evans, and he's had a satisfying arc over the course of the MCU films. So today, I thought I would go through the journey of the character of Captain America in chronological order. Now, a quick little background here, you can skip to this timecode if you just want to get to the timeline. About 2 years ago, I uploaded the final edition of my MCU in chronological order series, and yeah, that video took a while to make, and watch, and I'm really proud of it. At the end of it, I said I wouldn't be doing another one, and I stand by that, because I've made 3 versions of this now, and there are only so many times I can put together this whole universe while keeping it fresh and new. However, I had the idea to do this sort of thing for individual characters. Or maybe just this one, we'll see if I make more, because in putting this entire universe timeline together, you can lose the individual journeys sometimes. So I thought I would put, in this case, Steve Rogers' MCU journey in chronological order, from beginning to end. It can be interesting to view this world through the perspective and continuous storyline of one character, so that's what I'll be doing today. Now, I will just warn, some stuff about this character is a little bit contradictory. Like, for example, in one prequel comic, it says that Steve's mom died when he was a kid. In the movies, he's 18. Little stuff like that might be a bit contradictory. But I've done my best to piece all of this character's stories together in the most coherent way possible. So, let's get into this. Stephen Grant Rogers is born on July 4th, 1918, because of course he is, to his mother Sarah. His father Joseph was fighting in World War I and had died a few months earlier, and so Sarah has to raise Steve on her own. However, his dad being a soldier really inspires Steve as he grows up, leading to him wanting to fight for his country, but we'll get to that. Steve's a pretty sickly and weak kid as he grows up. He suffers from asthma, heart troubles, a bunch of stuff. Here's a list. And yeah, life's tough as a skinny, sickly kid, because he also gets bullied a lot. But he's sure to always stand up for himself and never run away, because if you start running, they'll never let you stop. He is fortunate enough to get a bit of help with the bullies from a guy called James Buchanan Barnes, aka Bucky, and they become really good friends over the years. Steve goes to George Washington High School from ages 14 to 18, because of course he does, and from ages 19 to 20, he's found his passion for art and so attends Brooklyn's own Auburndale Art School. All this time, him and Bucky are having fun times together. Like this one time they go to Coney Island and Steve throws up on a ride, or this other time Bucky tries to impress a girl called Dolores, just to name a few. Then World War II breaks out, and then Pearl Harbor happens, and then the US enters World War II. Steve sees this as a perfect chance to do what's right and fight for his country and stop some bullies and follow in his dad's footsteps and all that good stuff. So, to prepare for this war that he's definitely going to be allowed to fight in, Bucky gives him a classic Rocky-style training montage with some boxing practice. And then he is immediately rejected because of his health issues. However, Bucky enlists and he does get in. He's in top form from that Rocky training. Steve keeps illegally trying at different offices because he really wants to join the war, but he continuously gets rejected. To cheer him up, and because he's leaving soon, Bucky takes him to the Stark Expo with 2 girls as a double date, which ends with Steve somehow being a 4th wheel, where this millionaire, Howard Stark, has a bunch of inventions of the future being displayed, which don't impress Steve very much. He's still thinking about joining the army, and him and Bucky have another conversation about it before Bucky goes off. This is overheard by this guy, who catches Steve trying to enlist again, and tells him he is Abraham Erskine, a scientist working with the US military. He sees that Steve is pure of heart and thinks he would be a good candidate for a US government project to help the war effort by injecting soldiers with a serum that enhances them to peak human physical condition, which is also being helped to be designed by that millionaire Howard Stark. Steve gladly takes the opportunity and joins the army, which turns out to be very tough, especially for a guy of his stature and build. But he pushes through it and stays committed. In the army, he also meets Colonel Chester Phillips and Peggy Carter, an officer who is also working on the serum project. Steve continues to show his worth for the serum with his intelligence, his tenacity, and his heart, and he is officially selected for the project. And on the way to the experiment, he hits it off with Peggy a bit. Steve is put into the project's experimental chamber and given the serum, and it works perfectly. He comes out looking like he's been on Chris Evans' workout routine and diet for months. However, the Nazis have also caught wind of this experiment, because Erskine used to work for them, against his will, specifically their Deep Science Division Hydra. Their leader, Johann Schmidt, took a worse version of the serum, which did give him some superpowers. However, it did not give him Chris Evans' pecs, but rather a detachable skin face. So, they've infiltrated this experiment, they kill Erskine, and take the rest of the serum. So Steve is the only super soldier the US has. Instead of sending him into war though, the government thinks he'd work better as a propaganda poster boy for the war, which turns out to be a huge hit in America, despite Steve's nerves initially in front of crowds, but not so much overseas with the actual soldiers. And also remember, Steve wanted to serve and do the right thing, and now he just feels like a circus monkey. At least his art passion is still getting a bit of time, and hey, he's still talking to Peggy. However, around this time he hears that Bucky's regiment has been captured and that Bucky was killed in action. But he refuses to believe that Bucky's dead, and knows he has to try to save those soldiers. So, with the help of Peggy and Howard, he flies out there to save the day. His mission is successful. He liberates the prisoners and they fight their way out of there. He rescues Bucky, who was alive but was being experimented on by Hydra, and he confronts Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, for the first time and discovers firsthand why he has that nickname. After this display of bravery and competence, he's put into the actual fight as an actual captain, and he recruits some of the soldiers he saved for his own little squadron, the Howling Commandos. His relationship and romance with Peggy continues to progress, despite some people almost messing it up along the way. Steve then goes on mission after mission to take out Hydra, with lots of explosions in the process. He also gets a cool new outfit, and Howard gives him a shield made of a virtually indestructible metal called vibranium. One mission also ends with the capture of Arnim Zola, the Red Skull's right-hand man, but on that mission, Bucky falls off a moving train into the snowy depths and dies. Steve is very upset about this, understandably, and Peggy comforts him. The US then finds out that the Red Skull plans to blow up a lot of cities to win the war, so Cap infiltrates Hydra HQ and a big fight goes down. Right before he's about to jump on the Red Skull's plane while driving down the world's longest runway, Peggy gives him a kiss before he goes off. He then successfully makes his way onto and through the plane, with a few difficulties along the way, has a bit of a punch-up with the Red Skull, and defeats him. The Red Skull grabs the Tesseract, the powerful energy object that was a source of power for all of his super weapons, and it teleports him into space, as it seems to have some space-related powers. Steve doesn't have a lot of time to give this important piece of information a lot of thought though, as he's now on a plane with a ton of bombs on it, and he has to crash it into the Arctic to save millions of lives. He does so, getting to talk to Peggy one last time before he goes, promising to take her out to dance someday. Once firmly lodged in the ice, Steve and the ship freeze over, and Howard goes out to find him. He never does, although he does find that Tesseract though, and Steve's presumed dead to the world. He leaves behind a great legacy through his courage and his achievements. So then there's a while of Steve sitting in the ice. I almost said chilling in the ice, but I'd never forgive myself for that pun. In 2012 though, S.H.I.E.L.D., the modern version of the intelligence agency that Phillips, Stark, and Carter were part of back in the day, send out a search team that finally rediscovers his body and brings him back to HQ, where they discover that he's somehow still alive, as revealed in this subtle piece of dialogue.
This guy's still alive.
They decide the best way to reintroduce him to the world would be by putting him in this fake 1940s room and slowly breaking to him what happened. However, S.H.I.E.L.D. somehow doesn't do their research very well, cause Steve very quickly figures out what's going on. He busts into the real world and discovers what's happened. It's a lot to take in, for a guy who, in his mind, was in the 1940s yesterday. The present-day leader of S.H.I.E.L.D., Nick Fury, comes up to him and is like, "Hey, welcome to 2012. This is probably gonna take a while to sink in." And he details to Steve what had happened. Steve spends his first few weeks in the new world in this little cabin retreat place to adjust slowly to being back, and then after this, he keeps adjusting in New York. These are confusing times. He's trying to figure out how life works now, he's getting advice from kind old men in cafes, he's reading through files on his World War II buddies, and also discovers that Peggy is still alive. He waits to call her though, because he's not sure if she's ready for this kind of reunion, and he's also not sure if he's ready for this kind of reunion. He also finds out that his friend Howard had a kid who's now arguably more successful than him, Tony Stark, who has a big old building in New York. Steve's still readjusting and working out in the gym when Nick Fury comes to him and is like, "Hey, we've got a mission for you. This space god Loki's turned up and stolen that Tesseract you ran into back in World War II. You want to help us get it back?" And Steve, who hasn't even gotten used to what a computer is yet, is like, "Space god mission? Yeah, alright." So he teams up with a couple of S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives, Natasha Romanoff, aka Black Widow, and Phil Coulson, who's a nice guy and a big fan of his, to go take Loki out, who was also kidnapped with mind control the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. On the team to help them track Loki is also Bruce Banner, a brilliant scientist who, on a side note, also turns into an enormous green rage monster when he gets angry due to a failed science experiment that was meant to replicate the super soldier experiment. They find Loki, and Cap has a bit of a fight with him, but A, he's still stuck using 1940s fighting styles, which don't work great against a space god, and B, he's still not totally back to fighting form after being frozen for 70 years. So it doesn't go too well. He gets saved though by Tony Stark, who happens to do some superheroing of his own in a very advanced armored suit. They become acquainted and immediately don't really like each other.
You might have missed a couple things, doing time as a capsicle.
But there's not much time to think about that, because Loki's space god brother Thor shows up and steals him. Him, Cap, and Iron Man have a bit of a scrap before they realize they're probably all on the same team, and so take Loki back to S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ, which happens to be a flying invisible fortress where they can discuss things further. I just have to reiterate, when you put this from Cap's point of view, he goes directly from a somewhat futuristic 1940s into the modern day MCU. There is a bit of stuff to take in. Anyway, Loki starts getting the Avengers, which is what this superhero team-up program is called, to turn on each other, but really, they don't need his help. They're doing a pretty good job of it anyway. Steve starts poking around the helicarrier due to Tony being suspicious of S.H.I.E.L.D. and finds some old Hydra weapons. He confronts Nick Fury, and Fury's like, alright, you got me, we were gonna use the Tesseract to make weapons, like Hydra did, to help against otherworldly threats. The Avengers aren't too happy about this, more fights break out, they are not working very well as a team, and then Loki's escape plan starts, which involves the helicarrier being sabotaged. Steve and Tony put aside their dislike for one another to work together for a bit to make sure the ship doesn't come crashing down. But in the ensuing battle, the Avengers are split apart and Coulson is killed, which gives these Avengers finally someone to avenge. They realize that Loki's evil plan is to let an army of space aliens onto New York to destroy it, and so the Avengers manage to regroup to fight to save the day. Steve puts on arguably the worst Captain America suit and leads the team into battle, which they come out of victorious.
We won.
Loki's taken away by Thor, along with the Tesseract, the aliens are all dead, Loki's scepter is taken by S.H.I.E.L.D., and the Avengers go their separate ways, although they realize that they work pretty damn well together as a team, if they can set aside their differences. After all of this craziness, the government recruits Steve to do some promotional stuff for them, a bit like they did in the 1940s, except this time, it's not for a war, it's for teaching kids in school about good moral lessons, in case that suit already wasn't lame enough.
Math.
Cap makes a few of those, and then becomes an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. He starts working under Nick Fury with Natasha and a bunch of other S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives to take out terrorists and go on missions, and through this process, he learns lots of modern-day skills, such as different martial arts forms and espionage techniques, while also becoming better friends with Natasha. He builds up this new skill set and job for about 2 years, to the point where he's going on regular S.H.I.E.L.D. missions and is their best agent. He also meets a veteran named Sam Wilson, and they bond over their similar past war experiences and their mutual love of jogging around the reflecting pool.
Don't say it. Don't you say it. Left. Come on!
Steve is also getting back to some of the more normal parts of life. For example, he's flirting with his next-door neighbor. He also discovers he has his own wing at the Smithsonian, which is both cool and also makes him sad and reflective. He also finally visits Peggy, who is now over 90 and has some form of dementia. However, back at work, he's not too stoked about Nick Fury's next big plan, which is to use a bunch of S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers to kill terrorists and eliminate threats before they commit their crimes using an advanced program called Project Insight. He also soon figures that something big is up because Nick Fury shows up at his apartment all battered and bruised and tells him not to trust anyone, after which he is shot and killed. Steve chases the assassin, who's got a metal arm and a neat face mask and can catch a shield, who then gets away. Steve also discovers that his next-door neighbor is a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, Sharon, which he isn't too happy about.
Captain Rogers?
Neighbor.
After this, Steve meets with one of the higher-ups of S.H.I.E.L.D., even higher than Nick Fury, Alexander Pierce, who gives him a very subtle, I'm definitely not the bad guy talk about not getting in his way. Steve's like, yeah, that's probably not great, and then he gets attacked by about a dozen guys in an elevator, some of whom were his trusted fellow agents. He beats all of them up, escapes in a simple but effective way, fights a jet, and goes on the run, trying to figure out what the hell is happening. Natasha shows back up, knowing that something's not right, and she reveals that the assassin that killed Fury is called the Winter Soldier. She also tells Steve that this Winter Soldier attacked her a few years back, and that he's a bit of a myth and a ghost who's been killing people for the past several decades. Steve's still kinda suspicious, but he's technically like 90 years old, so it's not the craziest idea. The two of them follow a clue that Fury left to Steve's old training base, where they discover a giant computer system with Arnim Zola's face in it, and also his mind. He lets them know that Hydra has actually been growing inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. for the past 70 years or so, and it's going to use Project Insight to kill a bunch of good guys, because that's what Hydra does. This is even more for Steve to take in, but he doesn't really get the chance, because Hydra S.H.I.E.L.D. shows up, and they have to escape. They hide out with Sam Wilson, who reveals when he was in the Air Force he used to use a military wingsuit, a Falcon suit, if you will, which he would be happy to put on again for some superheroing with Captain America. The three of them form a plan to take a Hydra S.H.I.E.L.D. officer into their custody to help them stop Project Insight, though he's killed soon after when they're attacked by the Winter Soldier again. After an intense fight, Steve discovers that the Winter Soldier actually is Bucky Barnes. Yeah, you already knew that. Steve's pretty shocked. They all get taken captive by Hydra, but escape soon after with S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Maria Hill's help, and discover that Nick Fury is also still alive. Alright. Steve, Nat, Sam, Fury, and Hill form a plan to hack into the three helicarriers, make them fire on each other instead of good guys and innocent people, and in that process, some of Hydra's main weapons will also be destroyed. I feel like there might have been a few less complicated, specific, Mission Impossible type solutions to this, but whatever. It works in the end. There's a bit of a battle, and Steve comes face to face with Bucky again, who, it turns out, has been brainwashed by Hydra to be their own super soldier. Steve tries to convince him that he's Bucky and not the Winter Soldier, and takes a lot of punches to the face in the process. But he eventually does get through to Bucky just as the helicarrier they're on crashes, and he falls into the water. Bucky saves him, because he's starting to be a little bit unbrainwashed, and heads off into hiding, while Steve ends up in the hospital where him and Sam listen to the Trouble Man soundtrack. Pierce was killed in the battle, along with a bunch of Hydra guys, but Hydra's still a threat, and Bucky's still out there, so Steve plans to find Bucky and bring down Hydra. Also, it's kind of unclear when this happens, but I believe sometime in this period, Steve discovers that Bucky actually killed Howard Stark and his wife Maria for Hydra, so not only Steve's old pal, but also Tony Stark's parents. Some people think he figured this out when Zola showed him this newspaper and said, "Accidents happen," or something to that effect.
Accidents will happen.
Which is also what I thought Zola was implying when I saw that in cinemas. But based on the fact that it's supposed to be this big twist in Civil War, and that also at that point Steve is 100% sure it was the Winter Soldier and not some other Hydra operation that killed Tony's parents, which I don't really think you'd be 100% certain just from this, I'd say he finds out for sure at some point this time when he's searching for Bucky. So Steve keeps searching for Bucky around the world with the help of Sam, and they also take on Hydra, but turns out a huge Nazi supervillain cult is kind of hard to take out with a two-man team, so Cap decides to get the Avengers back together to finish off Hydra. Also, Hydra's gotten their hands on Loki's scepter, so Thor is especially interested in that as well. They fight Hydra for a bit, and eventually find out where their main base is, which they attack and get Loki's scepter back, while also being confronted by two siblings who have superpowers as a result of Hydra testing with the scepter, Pietro and Wanda Maximoff. But no time to worry about that. It is time to party.
Drop it at his feet. I'm like, boom, you looking for this?
After the party, the Avengers all hang out and mess around, seeing if any of them can lift Thor's magical hammer Mjolnir, which you can only lift if you're worthy of the power of Thor. None of them can do it until Steve steps up and realizes, as he tries, that he actually can, because he is just so pure of heart, and brave and worthy and compassionate, and all that. But in order to not embarrass Thor, he decides not to lift it. However, during this fun, an evil AI robot starts talking to the Avengers and then attacks them. You know, insane stuff that's starting to become a regularity for Steve's life. After that, Tony and Bruce are like, "Yeah, sorry, we were trying to create artificial intelligence to help us against more alien invasions, and it seems to have gone a bit wrong." Steve's like, "Well, that's annoying, but we gotta stand together and fight this," and he does another great motivational Captain America speech.
How are you guys planning on beating that? Together. We'll lose. And we'll do that together too.
Wasn't really a speech, more like 2 lines, but you get what I mean. The Avengers head out to South Africa, where the AI, known as Ultron, is headed to get even more powerful using the super strong metal vibranium that Cap's shield is made out of, which is going to be bought from this guy called Claw, who stole it from another place called Wakanda. If you're familiar with the MCU, that'll all be pretty basic. If you're not familiar with the MCU, I'm not sure how much sense that'll make. The Avengers try to fight Ultron there, but Wanda Maximoff incapacitates them by giving them scary and/or sad and/or weird visions. Oh yeah, by the way, she's working with Ultron now, along with her brother, because they hate Tony Stark. Steve's weird vision includes being at a 1940s party and seeing Peggy once again, after the war's ended, but then all of it disappears in front of him. Meanwhile, Johannesburg kind of gets destroyed by a fight between Tony and a mind-controlled Hulk, so the Avengers have got to regroup and plan things out, and they do this by going to Clint Barton's farm. The team learns that Clint actually has a wife and kids, and Steve reflects on that kind of normal life that he wishes he could have had, especially after seeing the vision of Peggy. Thor goes off to learn more about the Infinity Stones, these 6 super powerful objects that hold most of the power of the universe, but I'm sure that's not going to come up later. Steve and Tony also decide to chop some wood to pass the time, and Steve's like, "You know, you probably shouldn't have made a killer robot." And Tony's like, "Well, shut up." It's a little deeper than that. Tony argues that Ultron was designed so the Avengers wouldn't be necessary anymore, and that Earth would be more safe. Steve argues that when you try to win a war before it starts, innocent people will die, but they get interrupted before this can develop into anything more than just a little bit of a discussion. Nick Fury also turns up to kick the Avengers back into gear. The team also figure out that Ultron is going to want to make a new, more powerful body for himself with the vibranium he has using a tissue printing machine, so they head off to South Korea to stop that. Ultron is trying to do just that, but before he can transfer himself into this new body, the Avengers stop him along with the Maximoff twins, who turn sides when they discover that Ultron wants to wipe out all life on Earth by launching a city at it like a meteor. Steve has a fight with Ultron, and with the help of the Maximoffs, the Avengers are able to stop a train that was sent off track by the fight. The vibranium body that Ultron made is sent back to HQ, but when Steve gets back there, he discovers Tony and Bruce trying to create another AI using Jarvis and this new body, building another superbot, and Steve's like,
Please, please, please. right off.
However, Jarvis is uploaded to the body, and with a boost from Thor's lightning, who turns up after learning about the Infinity Stones, one of which is in this body's head, which came from Loki's scepter, long story, this new being comes to life and becomes the Vision, a super powerful being, android, machine, person thing that is actually good and on the Avengers side, and his goodness is proved when he's able to lift Thor's hammer. Although maybe it doesn't count because he's a machine, but hey, that's a discussion for some other time.
But if you put the hammer in an elevator, it would still go up. Elevator's not worthy.
The team finds out that the city Ultron's planning on dropping on Earth is in Sokovia, so they head out there to stop that. Steve leads the team and gives them some motivational speeches, and a battle with a robot army ensues. Lots of superhero fighting goes on, Nick Fury shows up with helicarriers and flying lifeboats to evacuate civilians, Tony's friend War Machine shows up to help, Pietro Maximoff dies saving Hawkeye, and ultimately the day is saved. The giant floating city is blown up before it can hit the Earth once everyone's evacuated, and Ultron is finally killed by Vision. After this, the Avengers get back to HQ, Hulk flew off into space at the end of the battle and is missing, Thor goes off into space to find out more about the Infinity Stones, Hawkeye retires, and Cap says goodbye to Tony, who is going to focus more on his life and actual work, and less on superheroing. They're both like, I don't always like you, but you're a good guy, wish you the best, all that. Steve is then joined by Natasha, and the two of them are going to train and lead a new team of Avengers. This group is made up of Steve, Nat, Sam, aka Falcon, Wanda, aka Scarlet Witch, Rhodey, aka War Machine, and Vision, aka... Over the course of about a year or so, Cap leads this team on a few missions. For example, Hydra, who are still around in some capacity, collect some Ultron parts and create a giant robot called Ultimo that Cap and the team defeats. Seems like a pretty major thing, but I guess in this kind of world, that's just a Tuesday for these guys, cause it's never mentioned again. Also in this time, I have a theory that Steve tries out lifting Thor's hammer, or he did before Thor took off. Maybe he did sometime before that party. I don't know, but sometime around here, I feel like he must have practiced with it, because by the time he wields it in Endgame, he's way too good at it to never have practiced even a little bit. So, yeah, not confirmed, but I'm putting it out there. One mission Cap leads his team on is tracking down Crossbones, who's actually a Hydra guy Steve used to know who got a building dropped on him and is now a super criminal. The mission goes pretty well until the end, where Crossbones detonates a suicide vest, and Wanda, in an effort to save Steve, accidentally blows up a building full of people. The Avengers are now in quite a bit of trouble, and it turns out they have been for some time, actually. A bit of time goes by, Steve tries to comfort Wanda, who feels guilty, and then Tony rocks back up with a guy called General Ross, who crossed paths with the Hulk back in the day, and he presents them with the Sokovia Accords, a list of rules and regulations that would put the Avengers under UN control. This divides the Avengers. Tony feels pretty guilty about Ultron, and thinks that they should probably have regulations. There's been quite a bit of damage done over the years. Steve isn't a big fan of it, considering he's seen that organizations that you think are good and safe and on your side can be infiltrated by people who are not on your side, to put it mildly, and generally isn't a fan of the Avengers potentially not being able to save the world if they need to. While they start to argue about it though, Steve gets the news that Peggy Carter has died in her sleep, which is obviously pretty upsetting, and another harsh reminder to Steve of his old life having been left behind, and him never getting to fully live it. A funeral is held, at which Steve is comforted by Nat, and he also finds out that his neighbor, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, potential love interest, is Sharon Carter, Peggy Carter's niece. Yeah. Anyway, after the funeral, the Sokovia Accords are being discussed and signed in Vienna, but a bomb goes off at the location of the signing and meeting of world leaders, killing several of them, and it looks like Bucky Barnes is to blame for the attack. Steve sees that Bucky is finally back on the map, and decides he has to go and confront him and see if he really did this, and if he can get through to his old best friend. He teams up with Sam to do this, despite being advised by Nat not to, since Bucky is a wanted criminal now. Or I guess more so than he was before. Steve finds out Bucky's in Romania with the help of Sharon, and he confronts him in his apartment. He tries to get through to the real Bucky again, but he's still distant. Bucky's been hiding out for a while and trying to live a somewhat normal life, and the real Bucky is in there, but he's still pretty traumatized and isn't really sure what to make of his life at the moment. He does tell Steve that he didn't blow up the meeting, and then they're attacked by government forces there to kill Bucky. Steve kind of helps him escape while still trying to chase him down. He prevents the soldiers from killing Bucky, but Bucky manages to get away. Bucky then gets in a fight with Black Panther, aka T'Challa, a superhero who is the son of the King of Wakanda, who was killed in that explosion, and so he wants revenge on Bucky. There's a big chase, and all of them end up getting arrested. A psychoanalyst shows up to talk to and question Bucky, while the others are offered to have the charges dropped if they sign the Sokovia Accords. Steve and Tony have another argument about signing, and Steve still refuses, sticking to his principles. Him and Sharon talk about the possibility of Bucky being set up, and they start to suspect the psychoanalyst. Just then, the psychoanalyst reactivates Bucky's Hydra brainwashing, using a series of words that Hydra used to brainwash him, and he starts escaping in full crazy assassin mode. Steve chases him down and stops him from escaping in a helicopter with his bare hands. Him and Sam then take Bucky away and are now fugitives. They discover that Bucky is somewhat himself now, but still has the potential to be activated as a Hydra killing machine again. They also find out that the psychoanalyst, Helmut Zemo, isn't a psychoanalyst at all, but some kind of villain who wants to use a bunch of super assassins, just like the Winter Soldier, stored in cryosleep by Hydra in a facility in Siberia, for his own nefarious needs. Steve, Sam, and Bucky decide they need to stop him before he uses these assassins to cause an empire to fall, as Zemo said, but they're also going to need some help in the fight against multiple Winter Soldiers, given how much trouble one gave them. So Steve calls in Hawkeye, who agrees to come out of retirement for one last mission. Hawkeye helps get Wanda on board, and Sam calls in a superhero who he came across a little while ago called Ant-Man, aka Scott Lang. Sharon also shows up briefly to give Steve and Sam their equipment back, and her and Steve share a romantic kiss? However, right before they're about to leave, Tony shows up demanding that they stop, and Steve refuses, and a big fight ensues. Tony's also recruited a teenage superhero to his team, Spider-Man, who has a bit of a punch-up with Steve, and earns a little bit of Steve's respect. Craziness ensues. For example, Ant-Man becomes huge, and Natasha allows Cap and Bucky to escape, because, Steve's probably earned her trust and respect a bit more than Tony has.
Are you incapable of letting go of your ego for one goddamn second?
So Bucky and Steve manage to fly away, while the rest of their team is taken prisoner by Tony's team and the government. On their way to Siberia, Bucky and Steve have a conversation about if Bucky's worth all this, because Steve is kind of destroying his whole life here, but Steve assures him he is, and that they're doing the right thing.
I don't know if I'm worth all this, Steve.
What you did all those years. It wasn't you.
They get to the Siberian base and discover that they were followed by Tony, but he's discovered that they were actually telling the truth, and he's decided to team up with them to take out Zemo. They find all of these Winter Soldiers, except they're all dead. Zemo's there, and he reveals his real plans. He's from Sokovia, and blames the Avengers for the death of his family in the battle there, and so has decided to tear them apart from the inside. He then shows Steve, Tony, and Bucky video footage from the 90s of Bucky in full Winter Soldier mode murdering Tony's parents, which Tony is understandably upset by. He then also discovers that Steve already knew about this and didn't tell him, and yeah, after that and all the arguing they've been doing lately, and frankly over the years as well, Tony snaps and starts fighting Steve and Bucky. They punch, and they punch, and they punch a little bit more, and then they keep punching. Eventually, Tony shoots Bucky's metal arm off, but is beaten by the combined force of Steve and Bucky. Steve punches him a little bit more, and then gets up to get Bucky out of there. Tony's like,
That shield doesn't belong to you. You don't deserve it. My father made that shield.
and Steve's like, alright, and so leaves his iconic shield behind with Tony. Meanwhile, outside, Black Panther, who also followed them to the base, and who has also discovered the truth, and that Bucky is innocent, apprehends Zemo. Steve also needs to break his teammates out from the supervillain prison the government has put them in, so he does just that, with Scott and Clint going back to their families on house arrest, Wanda going off to be with the Vision, and Sam going with Steve and Bucky. Steve also sends Tony a letter along with a flip phone. The letter apologizes for what had gone down, and also for not telling him about his parents, and the phone is for, if the world ever needed the Avengers back together again, he could reach him. After all this craziness, Cap gives Bucky over to Black Panther and the Wakandans, who frees him up again and basically give him superpowered therapy with Wakandan tech, specifically with the help of Black Panther's sister Shuri, which helps to get rid of his Hydra mind control. While this is happening for a couple of years, Steve comes back to visit Bucky occasionally to check in on him. Now Steve decides to help the world in a more covert way than the Avengers did, given what went down in Civil War. So he teams up with Natasha and Sam to be undercover superheroes around the world, stopping stuff like terrorists who got their hands on some alien tech and those kinds of threats. At one point, Fury gets back in contact with him and says, maybe you and Stark should work things out at some point. I mean, who knows what could happen in the future? And Steve says, I gave him a phone. If he needs me, he'll call. He does this for about 2 years until he does get a call on that phone. But it's not from Tony, it's from Bruce Banner, who Steve hasn't seen or heard from in 3 years. Bruce explains to him that the endgame is here. There's this purple alien creature titan called Thanos. He's the guy who worked with Loki to send those aliens to New York all those years ago. He's back, and he's collecting those Infinity Stones that Cap's been running into for a while now. Also, Tony's gone off into space to fight him. If Thanos gets all the stones, half the universe will be killed, so the Avengers need to reunite, at least in some capacity, to stop that from happening. The first step of that for Cap is finding Vision, who has the Mind Stone in his head. Cap, Natasha, and Sam track him and Wanda to Scotland and step in to save them right before Vision's stone is taken by some of Thanos' minions. They all get back on the Quinjet and fly to Avengers HQ to gather themselves and think of a plan, where they also meet up with Rhodey and Hologram General Ross, who Steve gives a little message to.
And if you want to stand in our way, we'll fight you too.
Vision suggests that they destroy the stone and kill him in the process, but the other Avengers, including Steve, suggest they get the stone out of him and then destroy it. They decide that, as wanted criminals, staying at Avengers HQ is probably not the best idea, so Cap and the gang head to Wakanda to ask T'Challa and the Wakandans for help as well. Here, they can use the Wakandan tech and Shuri's mind to get the stone out of Vision's head, and Wanda can then destroy it, as her powers came from the same stone. That way, Thanos can't get all the stones. However, Thanos has figured out where they are and sends his army of Outriders to get the stone. The heroes and the Wakandan army have to defend Wakanda against this until Shuri gets the stone out. Cap also gets some new vibranium shields to help out in the battle. That epic battle then ensues. The Avengers start to get a bit overwhelmed, but then they get a surprise assist from Thor, who Cap also hasn't seen in about 3 years, along with a walking tree and a gun-wielding raccoon, who Thor's met during his time in space. Shuri doesn't manage to get the stone out of Vision's head before she's attacked, and Vision is almost killed, but Steve runs in and saves the day at the last minute. And then Vision saves the day at the last minute. All seems to be going pretty well, but then Thanos shows up with all 5 other Infinity Stones. I'm gonna stand behind this theory real quick. I believe Thanos kills Cap when he does this. I think Steve Rogers was killed when he got hit this hard in the head by Thanos, and then that was reversed when Thanos used the Time Stone to get Vision back to life to steal the Mind Stone. I mean, I think that punch should kill him, or at the very least have some lasting impacts, and he seems totally fine right afterwards. Remember, he's just to the peak of human ability, he's not invincible. But at the same time, I understand why some people don't buy that. A, it looks like Thanos is just using the Time Stone on Vision specifically. B, it's a superhero movie, Cap has survived a lot of stuff he probably shouldn't have. So honestly, who knows? But if you don't buy that theory, then Thanos incapacitates Steve, despite Steve putting his absolute all into holding him back. When Steve comes to, Thanos is gone, Thor looks confused, and only after this does Steve find out that Thanos killed Vision, got the stone, snapped his fingers, and disintegrated half of all life in the universe, including Bucky, Sam, T'Challa, and Wanda. This is a pretty huge shock to everyone, but the Avengers manage to get back to Avengers HQ to really figure out what's happening. It's not looking great for the heroes. It's an enormous worldwide, and actually universe-wide, catastrophe. Nick Fury also got snapped away, but the Avengers managed to find a pager that Fury sent out a signal with. Steve and co are trying to figure out who or what the signal was being sent to when another superhero turns up and reveals herself as Captain Marvel, or Carol Danvers. She turns out to be quite useful. She's super powerful, and she was friends with Fury back in the 90s, and he called her in to help with this crisis because this seems a lot worse than anything that's happened before. First things first, she tells the Avengers that she can find Tony, since they're not sure where he is, which she does out in space, and promptly returns him to Earth. Steve and Tony finally come face to face for the first time in 2 years, but Tony's also not too happy, given he also tried to fight Thanos and lost, and had to watch that Peter Parker kid, who is kind of like a son to him, disintegrate right in front of him, and he's also been living off of rations in space for a little while. Tony's both unwilling to help Steve, given that he feels pretty betrayed and hopeless, and also he doesn't really have any information to help. However, Nebula, the adopted daughter of Thanos, who was with Tony, does know where Thanos might be, his retirement home in a galaxy far, far away, and Rocket helps to find that location. Steve and the rest of the Avengers that are left, minus Tony, who's still recovering, head off to get the Infinity Stones from Thanos and return things to normal. When they get there and burst in on Thanos just trying to enjoy his breakfast, they unfortunately find that Thanos has destroyed the stones, which means they can't do anything. Thor then kills Thanos, and the Avengers head back to Earth, still defeated and with the universe still in a very bad place, with 50% of its inhabitants gone. The Avengers just kinda have to move on, and live in this world that seems irreversibly damaged. Obviously, everything's in chaos for a while, but eventually things settle down a little. Life is still very depressing and more complicated, but people are able to live their lives a little bit, even if the streets are more empty and everyone's generally pretty sad. A few of the Avengers stay together to work as a team, although Tony leaves to raise a family with his wife Pepper in a cabin somewhere. The Avengers don't do as many crazy world-saving missions now that the universe is the way it is, but they help out where they can. In his spare time, Steve also helps to lead a support group for people affected by the snap. Throughout all this, Steve realizes that he can't move on from the past, and desperately wants a way to fix it. And this further emphasizes for him how he's always felt like a man at a time, and in some ways wishes he could have just lived his life with Peggy all those years back. But anyway, it's basically a rough 5 years, until one day Steve and Nat are talking about life at Avengers HQ, which Steve can stay in now since, given the world's state, the government's not really in a position to still worry about Cap being a fugitive. Scott Lang turns up, who had previously been presumed dead. Scott tells Steve and Nat that he was doing some Ant-Man shrinky quantum realm stuff when the snap happened, and discovered that those 5 years since the snap passed for him in about 5 hours, because he was in the quantum realm, and there are time vortexes in there that can make time weird. This makes Scott think that maybe the quantum realm could be used for time travel, which could help them reverse what Thanos did. They go to talk to Tony about this, and Tony says, "It's nice to see you guys, but no." But then they go see Bruce about it, who's turned himself into Bruce, but also Hulk, but also Bruce, aka Smart Hulk, and he's up for giving it a shot. They get the research underway, although it's not going super well, but Tony changes his mind and realizes maybe preventing all of this would be a good thing, so long as he gets to keep the family he now has and the present doesn't change. In a nice gesture, he also gives Steve back the shield. The team then starts to reassemble. Thor's been having a pretty rough 5 years, but he agrees to join them. Hawkeye's been having a rough 5 years in a somewhat different way, but he also agrees to return. I don't know if Steve would have imagined when he was at art school in 1938 that in 2023 he would be leading a billionaire, a god, a green giant, assassins, superheroes, an alien, and a raccoon alien into a time travel battle. But hey, here we are. They create a plan to use a mix of Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Hank Pym's, Scott Lang's mentor, technology to travel to several points in time in different teams to retrieve the stones. And with all the stones, they'll then reverse Thanos' snap. Steve leads the mission to New York in 2012 when the Chitauri aliens attacked, a team consisting of him, Bruce, Tony, and Scott. Steve's job is to get the Mind Stone, which is in Loki's scepter, which he finds out is in an elevator with all of his old Hydra frenemies. He steps in there and first wonders what the odds are that they're all standing in the exact same position as the last time he beat them up, but then decides this mission will probably go smoother if he gets it from them without all of that kicking off. So he hits them with the classic Hail Hydra and gets out of there. However, minutes later, he runs into 2012 Captain America, who understandably assumes this is Loki up to his usual schemes. They have a bit of a punch-up. Cap beats up Cap, and then Cap beats up Cap, and then they both fall and take a somewhat ridiculous amount of hits that don't affect them in the slightest. Kind of a staple of the Captain America franchise. Anyway, 2012 Cap is distracted by 2023 Cap's picture of Peggy, and 2023 Cap manages to shock him and then escape by telling him that Bucky isn't dead. He then takes the scepter right after admiring America's ass for a sec. He meets up with Tony and Scott, who unfortunately were not able to complete their mission of getting the Tesseract, and so the plan is pretty much screwed, since they only had enough Pym particles to go back in time once and return to the future. However, Tony has the idea to go to Cap's old military base in the 1970s, at which point in time both the Tesseract and more Pym particles would be there, as it was also a SHIELD facility at that point. Cap and Tony go, leaving Scott somewhat confused, but he manages to get back to the future. Steve tricks 70s Hank Pym to leave his lab so he can steal some Pym particles, and then in trying to evade some security, he ends up in Peggy's office, where he sees a 50-year-old Peggy Carter? He's once again sad, thinking about the life he didn't get to live, but hey, the mission needs to go on. Him and Tony regroup, Tony got the Tesseract, they head back to 2023 where they get the news that Natasha had to die for the mission to be completed, which is pretty rough. Tony, Hulk, and Rocket put the stones in a new Iron Man Infinity Gauntlet, and Hulk puts it on, snaps his fingers, and brings back everyone who Thanos snapped away. This is pretty amazing, but as we've seen so far, these heroes rarely get a lot of time to celebrate, because 90 seconds later, a time-traveling Thanos from the past shows up. He followed them through time and blows up the Avengers base. Everyone survives, including Steve, and along with Tony and Thor, he finds Thanos chilling outside, just waiting to mess stuff up. Thanos' new plan involves grabbing the gauntlet with the stones, destroying the whole universe, and then making a new one. The three of them attack Thanos and are doing surprisingly poorly given how well Tony alone did against the Thanos with multiple Infinity Stones, but anyway. The fight isn't going so well for the heroes, so Steve decides he has to pull out everything for this one, and so he summons Thor's hammer to him, which he is worthy of lifting. And again, he definitely practiced with Mjolnir before this. This gives the three of them the upper hand for a little bit, but not for too long, as Thanos starts winning again. He incapacitates Thor and Tony, and breaks Cap's previously thought to be indestructible shield into pieces with his Thanos copter blade. Steve also gets cut up pretty bad, and is virtually defeated, and to put the cherry on top in the worst way, Thanos calls in his enormous army right then and there to kill Cap and the remaining heroes and take the Infinity Stones. There's absolutely no chance of survival, but Steve stands up anyway, still willing to give his all to fighting for what's right against these insurmountable odds. And just at that moment, he gets a blip in his earpiece, which turns out to be Sam.
Captain Sam, can you hear me?
Sam asks him to look on his left. He finally gets his sweet revenge for all these moments.
Come on!
And dozens of portals open up through which all of the heroes that were killed in the snap emerge. Not just superheroes, but also armies of wizards, warriors, aliens, gods, everything. Bucky's back, Sam's back. Everything's looking pretty good for Steve. Thanos isn't too pleased about this, and Steve is ready to lead basically all the heroes of the universe into battle. The troops rally, he calls the hammer to him once again, and, well, you know what happens next.
Assemble.
Steve leads the charge into battle, and a huge climactic fight ensues. Cap fights with Mjolnir, and briefly Stormbreaker, Thor's magical axe, although Thor demands it back, and he leads the team in their plan as well, as they have to get the Infinity Stones back to where they came from. Steve strategizes in the battle with Hawkeye and Ant-Man and Valkyrie, and some more heroes on how to make that happen. Captain Marvel turns up to help out as well, and Steve continues to lead the team by telling her to get the stones to the quantum tunnel in Scott Lang's van, which ultimately doesn't work out. Thanos gets his hands on the gauntlet, but Steve and Thor team up to stop him from snapping his fingers, although they're ultimately overpowered. Steve is thrown to the side and knocked out and incapacitated by Thanos. When he comes to, he sees Thanos and his entire enormous army turning to dust, much like how he saw his own friends disintegrate 5 years ago. He soon realizes, though, that this is because Tony put on the gauntlet and snapped, which allowed them to win, but also killed him in the process. Despite their differences, they developed a friendship and a mutual respect over the years, and Steve is not only sad to see him go, but also admires his bravery, selflessness, and his growth. At least that's what I'm gonna assume is going through Steve's mind right now. The battlefield is cleaned up, the armies return to their worlds, while the main heroes stay behind for Tony Stark's funeral. It's quite emotional, and Steve also gets to witness Tony's last recorded message for his family. So now that all's well and good, Cap volunteers to go back to those other timelines they created and return the Infinity Stones. He also decides that after everything he's done for this world and all the service he's served, he deserves the life back that he lost in 1945. So he plans to use the time travel to return the stones, then go back to the 1940s and live out his life with Peggy. What he's wanted for so long, and frankly, what he's earned. He tells Bucky this before he leaves, says goodbye to the team, and then goes back to return the stones. We don't actually see this part, although I'm sure one day we will in either a short or a comic or something, but for now, this is what I'm guessing he does. Puts the Power Stone back in a container and drops it back in that shielded thing somehow, gives the Time Stone back to the Ancient One, puts the Mind Stone back in the Tesseract somehow, and puts that back at S.H.I.E.L.D. HQ. Actually, I'm starting to think this is a bit more complicated than the movie made it seem. How do you put something back in a Tesseract? Anyway, whatever. If you can get it out of a Tesseract, I guess you can find a way to get it back in. Stabs the ether back into Jane, drops Loki's scepter back next to America's ass, and hands the Soul Stone back to Red Skull, which is an interaction I would have loved to see. Honestly, I still feel like a lot of timelines are going to be messed up after this. I mean, I'm not sure what he would do about Loki and the Space Stone, or that 2012 Cap now knows about Bucky, and their Hydra thinks Cap is part of Hydra, and also the fact that Thanos traveled forward to the future from one timeline would probably also mess things up. Does Cap run into Nebula malfunctioning when he goes back to when the stone was taken? Anyway, a lot of questions for another time. Point is, Cap does it and gets the stones back, and it's all tied up with a nice little bow. He then sends himself back to 1949, where he surprises Peggy. Steve and Peggy get married, and they live out their lives together. So yes, there are two Steve Rogers in this reality. One of them is just stuck in the ice for a while, and when he gets unfrozen, I guess Steve just keeps a low profile as a guy who looks a lot like an old version of Captain America who just got unfrozen. I guess maybe he gets S.H.I.E.L.D.'s help with keeping a low profile or something, or he just does it on his own, but he does help out when he can in this reality. Nothing major, I'm guessing, no alien invasion, world-saving missions, but occasionally in smaller ways, he still helps out as he lives out the life he'd always wanted with Peggy. Peggy once again passes away in 2016 after living out a long, happy life with Steve, and later Steve then travels back to the original 2023 where he left Sam and Bucky and the Hulk, bringing a Captain America shield from that timeline with him. He gives the shield to Sam and passes on the Captain America mantle, and presumably now lives out the rest of his days as a content old man who lived an absolutely crazy life, and then the life he'd always wanted. And that is the end of Steve Rogers' journey. So, I hope you enjoyed that chronological recap of Steve Rogers' time in the MCU. Will he return someday? Maybe, but for now I'm pretty sure he'll be gone for a while. Probably my favorite MCU character. I really enjoyed putting this together. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at BHL_Hudson, where I am incredibly active, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.